Back tonight on In Focus, the economic freedom fighters have welcomed Parliament's decision to review its proposal to nationalise the South African Reserve Bank. Party leader Julius Malema would have introduced a private member's bill to Parliament back in 2018. Now, the EFF Treasurer-General Omphile Maotwe joins us now for more on that conversation. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time this evening. So the Parliament Budget Committee, if you like, would have come to brief you around this particular bill, the Reserve Bank Amendment Bill. What came out of that briefing? For example, are there any risks that they would have come up with that could be detrimental, I suppose, to the economy of the country, how those risks could be mitigated and so on and so forth, should indeed the Reserve Bank be nationalised?
Good evening to you, Tao, and good evening to the viewers of Newzroom. Look, firstly, we welcome to the presentation by the Parliamentary Budget Office. It's not a committee, it's an office of Parliament. And their mandate was to see the socio-economic impact should the bill go ahead and be signed into law by the sitting president. And they went beyond just, checking the issue of ownership. Because if you look at the bill, if I were to take you back, Tabo, the bill at the moment speaks about the ownership patterns being changed. Doesn't say anything about the role. It doesn't say anything about the mandate. It doesn't say anything about the independence of the Reserve Bank. So they went beyond the scope of just ownership to check. Look, on the ownership side, they said what prohibits us from expropriating or nationalizing the Reserve Bank without compensation is Section 25 of the Constitution, which speaks about the property rights, expropriation with compensation. So they said that's the first thing, which is something that the Legal Department of Parliament also highlighted back in the days, and they actually were part of the meeting also to reiterate that point that the bill as it is, it will be prohibited, it will be unconstitutional because of Section 25 of the Constitution, which has not yet been changed. So the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, then said, let's look at the scenario where should the bill be changed to allow for expropriation with compensation or nationalization with compensation. What then does it mean? And they took us back to, what we presented earlier on to say, in the whole world, Thabo, there's 240 central banks. And of that 240, only 9 are, they've got a public and private ownership. But out of that 9, 3 is wholly private ownership. And the 3 is Italy, is the US, and it's South Africa. And the 6, they've got some partnership with the state. Now, our point is exactly that surely as the EFF, we're not asking for something that is not done in the world. Actually, we want to align with the rest of the world, where you see 231 out of the 240 are fully state-owned, because then that makes the central bank to be at the center of the industrialization project. It makes the central bank to be at the center of the transformation of the financial sector, which today, 30 years into democracy, is still untransformed. So the PBO basically said, yes, it's possible, but you ought to look at compensation. And in terms of the socio-economic impact, they gave us an example of Australia, where the government took a little bit of time to compensate the share owners that were there at the time. And the argument is that, Thabo, if you look at how the Reserve Bank is structured currently, it's got 800 share owners who own 2 million shares. But each, the share price, then it's traded at 6 rand. So what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about 6 rand multiplied by 800, which is 12 million. And then they argue that there's also a dividend yield of 1 rand 66 cents, I think so. And we're saying, so the 1.66%. But that takes you to 20 million. So if we were to, as the EFF, we were to change the bill and say, okay, because Section 25 of the Constitution is not yet amended to allow for expropriation without compensation, let's look at this compensation that you're talking about.
Yes.
We're actually looking at 20 million. Now, the question then comes back to, is South Africa willing to forfeit nationalization of the Reserve Bank because they want to hold on to 20 million? Whereas if you were to look at the powers that the Minister of Finance will have, that the owners, which will be the 59 million people or 60 million people living in South Africa, would have, surpasses the 20 million, and therefore let them compensate with 20 million. And Thabo, the argument that the DA put forward firstly was that the Reserve Bank is not privately owned, which, I mean, all of us, we know it's privately owned. But then the second point is going to be, how do you then determine compensation? Our argument is, at the moment, the share owners are receiving 1,000 rand a year. So if we go beyond just the 1,000 rand and we say, let's compensate them with the 20 million shared across the 800, surely as the state, as a country, as the people of South Africa, it's something that we can do. So there isn't really a negative. The negative will only come in when we talk about compensation. But from the PBO, really it's something that is done worldwide, which confirms exactly what we said in our bill.
Yeah.
So we don't see anything wrong with that.
So expropriation with compensation, that would be brought about by the fact that the shareholders are not willing sellers.
So if we amend Section 25 of the Constitution and we put forward this bill after amending the Section 25, we do not even need to negotiate with them. We nationalize the Reserve Bank without compensation. That goes without saying. But should the bill go ahead in its current form and in the current form where South Africa is still hasn't really changed Section 25 of the Constitution, then we're looking at 20 million rands that needs to be paid to the share owners. The question of willing buyer, willing seller doesn't arise. This is not, the issue here is not the land, because the willing seller, willing buyer is on the part of the land.
Yeah.
Here is where we want ownership to be taken by the state on behalf of the people of South Africa.
Right.
And so that it enables the minister to appoint the board to have some sort of, currently the minister is really a spectator when you look at the Reserve Bank. He can't do anything, he doesn't have any powers. So we're saying, let the Reserve Bank be like a state-owned entity where it reports to the shareholder, which in this case will be the Minister of Finance. And Thabo, really this comes from the fact that we are in a democratic country. Every 5 years, we go into elections. The people of South Africa choose whoever needs to lead this country. And we form 400 members of parliament from different political parties, whom out of 400, one person becomes the president. They get elected by parliament to become a president who will then appoint the cabinet, which one of them will be the Minister of Finance. So if you look at what we are proposing, it really falls within the democratic dispensation, the democratic state that South Africa finds itself in. At the moment, the Reserve Bank really, in our view, is unconstitutional because it doesn't represent anyone. The board is there, it's chosen by the 800 people, who majority of them, by the way, don't stay in South Africa.
Yes.
And who also, the banks are at the forefront of managing the Reserve Bank, even though they get the license from the very same Reserve Bank.
Yes.
So there is so much conflict of interest and so much independence that somebody can talk about the mandate. But where we are right now, we're just talking about the ownership. Let's change the ownership patterns of the Reserve Bank.
So what do we aim to achieve through a state-owned central bank, and what's the analysis of the PBO as far as that is concerned? I think there are maybe 3 areas that you would have highlighted in your proposal. The South African Bank, as one of the apex of the financial systems in the country, should be democratically owned by the people as a whole, as a necessary and important building block towards a complete overhaul of the current financial sector. The nationalised South African Reserve Bank, together with state-owned banks in various sectors, dismantle the current banking concentration of the banking sector. State-owned SARB must pursue decisive transformation of the financial sector. Will that be achieved?
It will be achieved. So if you look at the Reserve Bank in its current form, the 5 big banks, they are there. The 5 big banks who owns 90% of the shares in the financial sector. They control, obviously, that's why the argument which the DA makes is that the owners, the share owners, don't have interest in the control. But that's not true, because then why is the 5 big banks there? And when the interest rate goes up, Thabo, it hits me and you in the pocket. But guess what? At the end of the financial year, you're going to hear that the CEO of Standard Bank, of FNB, of ABSA, of Nedbank. They are the ones who got even more richer. So with the Reserve Bank in its current form, the rich is getting richer, the poor is getting poorer. So we're saying, let's have a central bank that will be at the center of transformation of the financial sector. It can be correct, Tabo, that 30 years into democracy, with so many banks in South Africa, the 5 big banks owns 90% of the share. That's one. Number two, the Reserve Bank ought to play a central role in the industrialization of this country. Just take a look at the central bank in China, what it is doing to the economy of China through industrialization, leading the industrialization program of the state. The Reserve Bank will never lead industrialization of the state because it's not state-owned. You'll speak and scream and say DTI is supposed to do this, Transnet is supposed to do this on the other side, Dinel, you'll name all of them. But for as long as they are not backed by a central bank that is state-owned, that follows within the agenda of the state, we will not see any transformation. And Thabo, we are actually saying to the people of South Africa and the world, if you allow the Reserve Bank to continue the way it is, it's actually not in your interest to come and invest, because the argument was that we are going to do away with the investors. Why would you want to invest in a country which is at war with itself? If you look at the rape cases, the murder cases in South Africa, people who get killed on a daily basis in South Africa, it's like we are at war, we are in Israel. Actually, at some point, our numbers even surpass the numbers of Israel. So no investor would want to invest in a country that is marked by violence, by unemployment, because all the socio-economic conditions of our people are the ones that leads to this crime rate that is skyrocketing. The levels of poverty are still high in the country. The levels of inequalities are still high in the country. The levels of unemployment. These 3 issues will not be resolved for as long as the Reserve Bank doesn't play a central role in the economy of this country. Look at the Itala Bank, for an example, which is something that we're going to debate this week as the Finance Portfolio Committee. You wouldn't be having the issues that Itala is having if you had a Reserve Bank that has got the interest of the people at heart and not the interest of the private banks. At the moment, the private banks are too powerful, and they're being made powerful because they've got shares in the Reserve Bank. They control what happens in the Reserve Bank. Remove the banks from the Reserve Bank. Let the Reserve Bank be owned by the state so that it can dictate what needs to happen to our people. And I can tell you, Thabo, it's one of the things, this Reserve Bank being privatized came in the dawn, in the transition between apartheid and democracy. When white people realized that they're going to lose power, they said, we can't lose power in its entirety. So let's hold on to 2 things. And one of the 2 things is the issue of the land, and it's the issue of the financial sector. And they hang on to the financial sector through the Reserve Bank. So we need to transform the financial sector through nationalization of the Reserve Bank.
What is this 3rd round then of public consultation supposed to achieve?
So if you look at, so with the bills of parliament, there are those bills that need public participation. This bill, because it was introduced back in 2018, there was some bit of public participation, but it was not open enough. I think it was even conducted in the Western Cape. So you would imagine, Thabo, that if public participation is open for a period of a month or 2 months, and it's a physical sitting in Cape Town, you are from Messina, when will you get to Cape Town? You are from Pititi Suleyang in the Moses Kotane in the Northwest. You are from Springbok, when will you arrive? So we felt that we did not open the public participation to a lot of people. So let's open it, because the people who came that time were the NGOs. And those NGOs, we know who owns the NGOs and who controls the NGOs. So we need to open it to our people so that we can listen to our people the same way we did when we did, not at the magnitude of the land question, like we did with the public participation during the parliamentary hearing of the land question, because that was actually amending the constitution. But this one ought to be opened to the entire society. It can't be correct that it's only few people who came and represented the interests of the people who are actually against nationalization of the Reserve Bank. So we have to listen to our people. And then when we come back from listening to our people, then we sit at the committee and we do what is called the motion of desirability. Is this bill desirable? We now know what the bill is about. We've heard what Legal Parliament Office says. We've heard what the Parliamentary Budget Office says. We've heard what our people are saying. Is the bill now still desirable? And that's where maybe people will come and say, yeah, maybe we can tweak it here and there. You can change it here and there. You can add this, you can subtract this. And then we'll have a solid answer that will then take us to whether the bill is going back to Parliament to be voted into law. And if it gets voted, then the president will sign it into law.
So in conclusion, I mean, if we were to get the essence of what the Parliament Budget Office would have then presented to you as the position now, that what we've been hearing before, for example, a president saying that it might not be appropriate at this time to nationalize the Reserve Bank due to the projected cost to taxpayers. That particular debate has been settled to say it will cost 20 million.
Yes, it has been settled. So, and that's a good thing that came out of the presentation of the Parliamentary Budget Office, because it says to you, Thabo, you've got 800 people who own shares. People, I mean, even entities. So everybody, legal entities that owns the Reserve Bank, 800. The share trades at 6 rand. That's 12 million. But there's a dividend yield of 1.6%. That takes you to 20 million. So if we were to compensate the 800 people, we take 20 million divided by 800. Let's walk away, comrades. We've done our part. In any case, we're never going to get this money because we're getting 1,000 rand in a year. So you can't. So the issue is between 1,000 rand and what we will get from the 20 million divided by 800. You can't ask for anything more. That will be robbery. That will be something that it's imaginary. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So walk away with your, take it's in the box or it's on top. It's either the 1,000 rand or it's the 20 million divided by 800. Then you walk away. Then the state takes over and takes the Reserve Bank, channel it to transform the financial sector, which remains untransformed, centralize the industrialization of the state, and get our people employed. Let's all get our hands dirty and work for this country. Let's grow our economy so that you and I should not be worried about being marked as you leave your house going to work.
How does that then address the autonomy of the SARB? Because, I mean, currently they say those shareholders, for example, don't appoint who sits there, the governor and so on and so forth. Those people function independently. Those shareholders don't have any input on the monetary policy. How does that now affect the independence of the South African Reserve Bank?
No, remember when I started, I said there's ownership, there's mandate, there's independence.
Yeah.
So currently, Thabo, the 800 share owners, they are the ones who appoint the board. And then the board then appoints management, which deals with the running or day-to-day running of the Reserve Bank. What we are proposing is a state-owned entity. Take, for an example, Transnet. The minister will appoint the board, and then the board will then appoint the CEOs and manage. But these people are accountable to the minister. And the appointment of the auditing firm is done by the minister as opposed to being done by the board, which is appointed by the 800 people. So 800 people are the ones who own the Reserve Bank. They choose who sits in the board. The board then decides, the 7 boards, I think there are 7 or 8 or 9, somewhere there. They're not more than 10 though. Yes. They then decide to appoint the management. Management.
There are 14 member boards, 1 governor, 3 deputy governors, 3 directors that are directly appointed by the South African president, as well as 7 other members that represent the biggest economic industries in the country.
Thabo, the 800 share owners, they appoint the board. So currently it says the Reserve Bank is accountable to Parliament. It can't be accountable to Parliament because Parliament doesn't appoint the board. We're saying we want the minister to appoint the board. And then the board will then appoint the management of the Reserve Bank. The minister must also appoint the firm because in its current form, the Reserve Bank appoints the auditing firm. The Reserve Bank takes the audited financial statements to Parliament, not the minister. So we want to change that because we want the ownership to be in the hands of the minister, the same way as ESCOM, the same way as SAA, as Transnet, as DINER. It must be accountable to the minister, who is then appointed by the president through a democratic process.
All right. And at this particular point then, where does the matter sit? Because as I mentioned earlier, you've raised this matter since 2018. We're still not sure what could have kept this matter for so long before it's resurfacing now. And how do we know that it's not going to disappear again and now it's really revived and we'll see its conclusion?
So, yeah, it's been delayed, that we agree. It shouldn't have taken so long. I mean, the bills don't take that long. That means Parliament is so inefficient that bill can pass from one administration to the other. But we were told that we waited for the Parliamentary Budget Office to do its socio-economic impact study, which now came forward to the table. And what came out of the last week meeting is that we are now ready to go on with this bill through public participation. So after public participation, it will come back to the Portfolio Committee again, the Standing Committee of Finance, which will then, as I said earlier on, it will look at the responses from the public sector. And then it will say, we've listened, we know what the bill is about from the private member. We also know what the Legal Office of Parliament is saying about the bill, that you can't change it without compensation for as long as Section 25 of the Constitution is still there. We hear what the Public Parliamentary Budget Office says, that yes, it's done in the world, it can be done. And if you are to compensate, you can actually give 20 million rands to the share owners, and then they walk away. And then we listened to what the public participation has said, and then we look at the desirability of the bill. And we'll deliberate as political parties. Obviously, they will come with their ideology, because we come from the different ideologies as political parties. But we are all going to listen, and we're all going to lobby. And that's the point we made, even in the committee, that, look, we come here looking at the interests of South Africans, the interests of Africans. Because as I said, Thabo, you can't say you will scare away the investors if you take the ownership from private hands into state. Yet you are in a country which is at war with itself. The investors will not want to invest in South Africa for as long as there's this high crime rate. And therefore, it's in our interest, it's in the interest of the investors to actually see a stable country in South Africa. Then we'll take it if we all agree that, okay, in the best interest of the country and resolving the challenges that we are facing now in the country, let's go on with the bill. It will go to Parliament to be voted, and then the president will then sign it into law. But we are almost there. We are halfway. At least at this point, it was not turned back. It would have been difficult to want to continue with the bill if the PBO had said, yes, no, all things negative about the bill. Okay. But from the presentation of the PBO, it was actually all things positive, because they looked at the whole world, what the whole world is doing, and they said, look, there were challenges here and there, and they only pointed two challenges, by the way, Thabo. And surely all we're saying is that it can be that we request to be part of the 231, take it up to 232. And therefore, we're told we're in the wrong direction. Okay. Why are the 231 not in the wrong direction? If the 231 is in the wrong direction, so be it. We'll also join the wrong direction. But as things stand, really, they are not in the wrong direction. We've seen what the Reserve Bank does in terms of the economy in the countries such as I said, China, Russia, and you name all of them. Obviously, it's only Italy, it's the US, and it's South Africa where you've got absolute private ownership of the Reserve Bank.